Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. We live in an era that is confronting us with many challenges, from geopolitics, climate change, droughts, floods, wars, pandemics, to viruses, water, food and energy shortages, and also ballooning global diasporas. But there are other challenges that could have greater existential impact on humanity that don't get as much attention. Kingsley L, PhD, is a full-time writer and researcher who previously worked in the sociology department at Lancaster University in the UK. He's the author of numerous articles on social futures, technology, global affairs, consciousness studies, and conscious evolution, and the author of over 20 books, including Life in the Continuum, Unified Cosmos Life Purpose, Hijacking Reality, Healing the Wounded Mind, Breaking the Spell, New Consciousness for a New World, and The Celebrated Dawn of the Akashic Age with Irving Laszlo. He also served as Director of Publications for the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research and runs his own publishing imprint, Beautiful Traitor Books. Kingsley Dennis joins me now to discuss the forces at play in the world that are actively nullifying metaphysical values and realities in order to replace them with an ever-deepening materialism, the drastic decline of the human spirit caused by an epidemic of reality deceit, and the increasing disembodiment that's reflected in such forms as the techno-digital ecosystem, extended reality, computerization and algorithms, and artificial intelligence, and more. Kingsley Dennis, welcome.
Hello, Sandie. Pleasure to be speaking with you today.
And to have you here with us as well. So at the end of 2019, you produced a video that outlined your thoughts on how 2020 would unfold. You said that 2020 would continue a process that we were seeing unfolding across the globe, which was causing many to ask, is reality broken? You laid out a picture that proved to be very, very accurate. And you talked about a rise of dissonance within the collective consensus reality that would shape people's beliefs and perspectives on their worldview. So tell us more about what you were looking at then and what has changed or progressed in the 3 years since.
Well, you're right, Sandie, and I didn't really expect things to be coming apart so quickly. I don't think anybody did, really. That's why we're here now. At the end, late 2019, I was asked to produce my thoughts for the year ahead and to come out in the new year. And I did create this article and then the video called The Consensus Reality Meltdown. And what I was considering was that for a long time, as we know, reality is a consensus. We accept it and we participate in it, and therefore we uphold it, sustain it, and often take it forward. And I was noticing just some trends, especially through technology, how certain narratives were being steered in a direction which was not benefiting the whole, let's say. And I was seeing perhaps the potential for some splitting off, whereby this consensus would not be so complete as it was in prior years and decades. So I felt that if this continues, even in a normal linear mode, then we would have along the line further splitting off, whereby people would start to not share or the agreement, the reality agreement, and there will be more divisions, more social segregation, and less agreement across the social board, across the social alliances. And so I felt that that was going to accelerate. What I didn't foresee is that because of what happened in the early months of 2020, is that really there was a lightning bolt shot through the whole core of this, and the whole consensus reality was literally kind of imploded, or rather, it was I would say, an intentional takedown, whereby the reality that we had before, that we go about our daily business, everything is, the systems that provide for us are providing for our well-being, everything is in place. But once that starts to disintegrate, then you have a complete acceleration of, let's say, when systems don't work, they really don't work. Because we've come to a point in our lifestyle whereby our systems are so complex and so integrated, if just one or two elements start to break away, such as the paradigm of health, the paradigm of our mobility, going out, having freedom to go to the shops, this was severely dismantled, let's say, in 2020. And therefore, we entered a stage of non-linear narrative breakdown. And I think where we are now is, because you enter a non-linear stage, the breakdowns are much more advanced. We're coming to a point now, which I've called the split reality, whereby you can be standing on the sidewalk next to people, or even amongst your closest friends and family, and yet a person can be so close physically to you and yet live in a different reality. They perceive a different reality, and it's almost difficult to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, we've seen so much of this division, haven't we? And I think, the coronavirus pandemic was a good example of that, because it divided people on a particular topic, and completely polarized people, and members of families. It's like civil war going on. We're just not talking to one another, and I think everybody was shocked at the vehemence, of people's attitudes and the lines that they were taking. It was, just completely. So I think that in itself was enough to blow people's minds. Forget everything else that was happening. But we've been hearing for a long time, and we're certainly witnessing it. That the digitization technology is really, really hijacking our minds. It's and our reality along with it. I watch the young people in my family who, unlike any other generation that's gone before, they cannot keep their mind on anything for very long at all, because they're not allowed to. They've constantly got this thing that they regard as their savior in their hands. It's the Bible, it's the gospel, it's everything to them, and because of that, they're losing their ability to think for themselves. They're losing their ability to reflect. They don't really know what they think anymore. And it's changing so quickly. So this is, if you really want to take down humanity and tear them apart, well, starting with the kids is a great way to do it, isn't it?
It is. And I think one of the results of what we've seen in the last 2 years is that, you see, a lot of technology has always worked what I call in the backstage. We don't notice it because it makes everything run. We can travel on time, we can have our connections, our conferences, and when it runs in the background, you're not so aware of it. And I think one of the major results of what's happened, say, since 2020, is that these aspects have come more to the foreground, because it's the same aspects that were in the background now have to control to a greater degree, or let's say socially manage, and to what's been happening through in the last 2 years through our movements and our health regulations, and so therefore it's on the front stage. And when these elements come to the front stage, then of course they come out of the shadows. And we have to notice them more. And once you start to notice something, they enter your reality set. And it's the same thing. For example, if you're thinking of buying a car, once you think about a certain model of car, you start to see it everywhere. because it's entered your reality set, and we need certain things to enter our perceptive gaze now, which were not so before. So I could say it's an advantage that I think humanity's perceptual gaze is now entertaining, or is be able to perceive some of these aspects of technology and how it affects us, how it affects the world around us, how it affects our very thinking patterns, because these are the vessels or the conduits of how narratives and ideas and social programs are transmitted. And so I think it's a merger of, let's say, the hardware and the software. The hardware of the technological ecosystem, which is more on the front stage, and the information that they're transmitting, which is a software. And these things are really accelerating and being made a lot more prominent in how they're utilized. And so that's why I think that it's very much in our visibility spectrum right now, and rightly so, because now more than ever, it's very important to realize these things.
Well, it is. It's important to recognize what's happening, but at the same time, I mean, you wrote an article recently in which you were talking about how, what we think we want, what we think we want, the whole free will thing, it's all conditioned, it's all curated. And so people are beginning to understand that their minds are being hacked. They understand what is happening with advertising, with technology. But it is so deeply ingrained by the time they understand it that they can't disentangle from it.
Well, I think previously that was the case where we couldn't disentangle from it or notice it was happening, because at each epoch, let's say, or certain cultural transformations, you need to recalibrate the worldview. And we've moved through different revolutions: scientific revolution, industrial revolution. I think what we're going through now is such a monumental change, because it's bringing in so many aspects of human life on let's say, on the aspect of psychology, well-being, financial, political, our cultural lifestyles. And the transformation has to be quite radical, like that. You really have to be very deeply entangled in cultural conditioning not to see this going on. And that's why the media is working overtime to put out certain consensus narratives, because this transformational moment we're in, people are seeing this and waking up quicker. The kind of, let's say, the overload or kind of cognitive dissonance has to increase to keep people in line with where the narrative is going. But I've always abide by what was said in the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, is that when the root of wickedness is hidden, it grows strong. When it is seen, it perishes. So I do feel that although some subjects may be uncomfortable for people, or may be uncomfortable, that it's necessary to see them, to bring them out in the open, so therefore imagined fears or manufactured anxieties don't actually exist in the way that some people think they do.
Well, talk to me about life reversal. I mean, you say that the biggest danger we face right now is this disconnect, this splintering from a sacred source, which has come to signify the nature of the reversal that epitomizes much of contemporary life. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, I've called it a life in reversal because I see a type of inversion going on, where certain, for example, the narrative we're being told now is that we need to move into a future of progress, of high technology and technologizing our industry and our other systems and our financial systems. And there's a lot of talk which kind of seems very much along the path of transhumanism. But you see, that's been told that this progress is for our betterment, our human development. But for me, I would call it an inversion, because rather it's an external move, which is a greater detachment away from any kind of inner development. And I've talked about this in terms of this physical digital ecosystem. So, for example, we've talked in the past about, we think that something which is ephemeral or etheric, We've talked about, our etheric bodies, our astral bodies, our light bodies. This type of understanding is seen as being positive for inner development. But if you see now, these memes or this way of thinking is moving over into the physical domain, especially with digitization, avatars, and this talk of the metaverse, is that humanity can move into a more bodiless future, whereby, because bodies are weak, let's face it, we've been told that bodies get ill, bodies, are not up for the future, they're not, resilient enough. So we have to move away from the body. And in one sense, it may seem like, oh, this is a move for human betterment, because whatever move towards becoming less physical is obviously more towards the spirit. But in fact, I see that as an inversion, because it's moving into less physical domains, but it's another aspect of materiality. It's a greater detachment from the inner being of the person or any inner path, because although you're going away from the body, you're going into deeper layers of entrapment into the material paradigm, which is this horrible, almost dystopian metaverse. And I often think of the film Inception, which was, I think, came out around 2010, whereby the protagonists go in a dreaming within a person's mind. I think Leonardo DiCaprio was in the film, and the intention to go into a further level of the dreaming, and then a further level of the dreaming, and so you're going further and further down, but you're going further down the rabbit hole of the dreaming, which is further away from the kind of, let's say, real life. And I feel that's where we're going. It's a kind of invisible rabbit hole where we're not going down a more ethereal, light body future, but deeper into material entrapment, which is actually further away of the body vessel, which is part of our conduit for consciousness and source consciousness. So the avatar is not that conduit. And so that's what I was talking about. And I would also, maybe later, I'd like to talk about the difference between light and electricity.
Okay, we'll make a point of that in the second half of the program. One of the things that interested me in your article, you were talking about how, Homo sapiens are in danger of becoming Robo Sapien, and that many people are suffering a form of reality deficiency. And you say that, you use the TV program, the TV series Westworld, as an example of, how we can be aware of the signs and signals that operate in the reality deficit, which and they are quite ubiquitous. We don't realize until someone points them out to us. Say a bit more about Westworld and what's happening there and how that interfaces with what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I noted Westworld because it's very clever, the script, and especially the most current season 4, and also I think popular culture has a way of putting out ideas and memes that can help us.
Yes.
I think maybe it's also used as a conduit for all all sides, let's say, all reasons. And in the latest one, it's actually the humans, let's say, believe that they're in their own world, just like we're in our world now, and we look around. In fact, what they don't realize is that it works on 2 levels. One is that their life is a script which has been written by an AI, like a story. And they go to work, they do their career, they have their life without realizing that it's a script which has been written for them to interact in this kind of AI produced world. But on top of that, within the world, they're also monitored within the AI world through signals which are put out through the technological infrastructure. Now, that's a kind of extreme case, because it's making a very extreme kind of fantasy, scenario. But if we take that on a subtle way, then we can see likewise that our world is, let's face it, I think we can say it's being terraformed. It's been terraformed to be a lot more amenable to a technological apparatus or a technologically entwined species and lifestyle. And so this has been coming through many narratives. We know about the disorder of we have an incoherent relationship with nature. Talk about organic things is now becoming more, anything organic is being looked at with a dubious eye, in terms of the environmental narrative, in terms of what organic species adds methane to the environment. Organic food, now we may have to move away from certain types of food. It's like, if the world is becoming more amenable to a kind of a techno terraforming type of world. Now the question is, we can adapt to that and recalibrate. Humans are very resilient to recalibrate. But the question is, every time we recalibrate, we need to ask ourselves, are we becoming more human, or are we stepping away from the position that enhances our humanity? So we need to look at things as being, are they pro-human or anti-human? Because although it sounds quite harsh, we need to recalibrate in a way which allows, in my understanding, a greater manifestation of consciousness into the world, rather than trying to find a replacement for consciousness. All this stuff about smart machines, it's not, I don't see it as an advancement. I see it as a replacement, a substitute, a replicant, to use Philip K. Dick's words.
Yeah.
And I think, just like Westworld, anyone interested could look into the works of Philip K. Dick. He noticed this replication and this simulation of the organic human life way before most of us did. So recalibration is not the same as a replacement of what needs to be human.
Okay, but as you're talking, I'm also thinking about, you talked about the scripts, etc., everything being laid out, but there are many people in the spiritual arena who believe that's exactly what we've done before we've come here. Before we even embody in a human form, we've got the script all laid out.
Yeah. Well, we may have that script laid out. The question is, who provided it?
Exactly.
Because if it's being given to us, and many scripts are given to us whilst we're in life, it's called social conditioning. And certain amount of scripts are necessary to be able to navigate through life. Because if we had no kind of understanding, we wouldn't be very successful as navigating physical life. So we need to know and learn the basic scripts, just like an animal learns from its mother in the first few months how to navigate the animal world. But when the script gets to an extreme place of social conditioning, and then a place of social management, then the human free will, because there's always an element of free will, even if you came in with a chosen script, you can choose to follow it, you can choose to sit back for a long while and then follow it halfway through your life. You have these choices. But I feel now we should speak out, because those choices are diminishing without us realizing it. And the more that we are immersed in an informational field, then perhaps the less we are instinctive to the consciousness fields. And there's a danger that informational fields start to feed us with ideas and narratives, and we start to listen less to what we understand as our instinct, inner being, our consciousness. And the whole point I feel of human life experience is to allow an increasing expansion of consciousness to understand how we can participate and contribute to the evolving human life. But if our internal input is diminished and the external input increased, then that's not fair play. The game is being rigged.
Yes, indeed. You talk about hijacking reality. Who do you think is hijacking reality?
Well, I do feel that external forces are hijacking reality, and we can take that onto different levels. For starters, we know that there are small groups of humanity that have always wanted to steer the human civilization and human cultures in a certain direction. That's not conspiracy or anything. We know that because from antiquity, you had a priesthood, you had certain minorities or elites, as we call them, that wants to steer humanity in a direction which benefits their invested interests. And that's happening very strongly now on this planet because we're moving through a very specific industrial revolution of automation and AI. We're moving through a shifting and recalibration of our supply chains. And so, of course, there's going to be a minority who wants to steer that in a direction which maintains their invested interests. At the same time, I feel it's a monumental period for the ability for the expansion of human consciousness. So these are evolutionary forces. Now, in any kind of game, universal cosmic game, you get evolutionary forces and you get de-evolutionary forces. I call them entropic forces because I don't really want to kind of personalize them because these forces exist. And sometimes they can work together. They often do because a certain amount of friction allows a push forward. So, for example, if you're driving a car, you need a certain amount of friction on the wheels on the road to create momentum. And if your car is driving up a steep hill, you want that friction to be able to push the car forward. And certain kind of de-evolutionary or friction forces are necessary to always trigger evolution. If not, there's a danger that life becomes too static. And certain moments are not able to find the energy to trigger them forward into a breakthrough move forward. But at the same time, sometimes these entropic de-evolutionary forces can start to get too dominant. And they can also get more dominant if their environment is more amenable to them. If the environment is more amenable to human development, then these entropic forces are more kept in balance. If for any reason, and there can be a plethora of reasons, whether it's human-made or just a confluence of circumstances or alignment of the cosmic environment, sometimes these entropic forces can get a stronger foothold and therefore have a let's say a context and an environment which is more conducive to them being more disruptive. And that then can create a great amount of friction. Now, this is a dangerous pivotal point, because if we put it in the context of complex systems, which just happened to be what I did my degree on at the university, is that the complex systems always come to what we call a kind of pivotal inflex point or transition point. At that area, as I'm sure many people are familiar with, you always need an extra input of energy to push through into a recalibration of the system. You need enough chaotic energy, because chaotic energy is more useful, it's not static, to push you through. But if you have too much of this chaotic energy at that pivotal moment, then you can have a collapse of the system. Just like building a sandcastle on the beach. If you can put the last few grains on sand on top and you have a wonderful new emergent structure, a new sandcastle, or you put too many grains on, the whole thing plops down, and then you've got a big blob in the sand. So this is quite critical that we understand that creative forces at the right time can seem chaotic. And certain forces which we are told to be progressive can actually be too chaotic at the wrong time. And we need to be mindful of, are these so-called progressive forces too chaotic at this pivotal moment? And I think that's a kind of area which we're now very much in the center of the cyclone at that time.
Absolutely. And I think everybody I speak to feels that they're too much. They're finding it very, very hard to cope with. But we'll come back to this in a moment. We're going to take a brief break now. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with writer, researcher, and prolific author and publisher Kingsley L. about the evolutionary crisis humanity is facing, with the accelerating materialism that's taking people away from a transcendental impulse and separating us further from source. We'll be back with more from Kingsley Dennis in a few moments.
OMTimes TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes' flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who have walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS, just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Kingsley Dennis, are you familiar with Paul Levy's work and his books on Wetiko?
Yes, I am, and I've worked with the Wetiko theme as well. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, because this sounds very much like, there is a mind virus that is, afflicting the entire world, I think, right now. And I wanted to see if that's something that you felt what you're talking about is very similar to what Paul is talking about.
It is in a way. I mean, I approached the Wetiko theme in a previous work of mine called Healing the Wounded Mind. And I also looked at the Wetiko in line with some other, philosophers and teachers, such as Rudolf Steiner and his talk of Ahriman, and also Don Juan and his talk of the flyers, and also Jung and shadow work. So I think we can see that there's this, we can look at it through the lens of one approach, such as Wetiko, but we can see it around in other pathways, in other traditions. And that for me is important because it validates the fact that something is there when different traditions examine and pick up and talk about and describe very much the same thing, but within the vocabulary and terminology of their own pathway. So there is a kind of mind virus, so to say, or there is an element which can create a psychosis or a partial psychosis. And also we can call it a kind of cognitive fog. There are different elements, and when we look at it from different areas, they all validate each other. And so I think what's happening is that now that's being strengthened because certain channels that cause this Wetiko or cognitive fog is able to target people easier because of our communication technologies and our connected lifestyle. So we're not suffering in isolation. There are many things that are in common now. Yes.
Yeah. You write that society allows certain consciousness discussions, but only so long as it doesn't give us too many tools. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, again, we always have these accepted conversations, and there are what I call accepted anomalies. And with any kind of system, a certain degree of anomalies are allowed, because again, that validates the system. To give a very simple example, we all think that like bad behaved rock stars who throw televisions out of hotel windows, that they're outside the system and they're rebellious. Well, they're not, because they aid the very system that they are so-called rebelling against. Because the more TVs you throw out of hotel rooms, the more publicity you get, and the more records you sell, and everyone's happy. You see, so these are kind of what I call accepting anomalies. And so in the sphere of consciousness research, now a lot of it is what I would refer to as being well-being research. And we can talk about lifestyles and well-being, and we can talk about consciousness and human consciousness to a certain degree. But if we really start to get deeper and look at what may be certain forces affecting consciousness and steering human consciousness thought patterns in certain directions, and maybe these kind of intrusive elements, then we can get censored very quickly. We can get culturally cancelled, or whatever they call it nowadays, like that. And this also is becoming very apparent now in the cultures, that even if you have a conversation which is not about consciousness, but which is not supporting the main narrative, you get very quickly, your anomaly is not so welcomed. But this is not new, because throughout the history, we've had these kind of persecutions and inquisitions, even in far back as the Spanish Inquisition. Any people who get together, and in the Inquisition, a group of people meeting together in a circle were called witches, because when you get people gathering and kind of talking about wisdom or pagan rites and that, then it's a threat to the system. And so there's always an element whereby you're accepted to a certain degree. And if you're saying something which the dominant system finds uncomfortable, they very quickly will find a way to quieten you down. So that's why sometimes popular culture, like we talked about Westworld or the books of Philip K. Dick, have a very useful way to transmit certain information in ways that perhaps doesn't get picked up by the system or by the people on the lookout, on the guardians of the threshold, so to speak, and they get inside. And this has happened through all traditions, through the Gnostic traditions, through the esoteric traditions. Alchemy became the forefather for modern science. Many people, teachers spoke in parables, because nobody, without the key, nobody could understand what they were saying. So they were safe. So we have to find ways, or certain transmitters, people who serve as transmitters, have to find ways to acceptably transmit the information without upsetting the apple cart, should I say.
So where do you see, I mean, you talk about, pop spirituality, spirituality light, where we see all of these wellness sites, famous people who start wellness sites, and there's a bit of marshmallow spirituality thrown into that, and that's okay up to a point, but really that's all about materialism, because it's all about selling you products that are going to help you raise your consciousness or your vibration, and pushing ideas like yoga and things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but it's always seems to be this, the commercial takes over, and it kind of weakens. It weakens the depth that the urge to go deeper, because it's satisfying people at a certain level, and distracting them from going deeper.
That's exactly so. It's like what I call the fast food section of so-called spirituality, because you get satiated very quickly, and so you feel, content.
Replete.
Yeah. And you don't want to go, you don't want to kind of go out and dig in your garden or grow your vegetables, because you've had your quick, your quick satiation. And now, in certain ways, certain practices of well-being are fine. They're good for maintaining a balance, but we have to realize what function they serve and what's their place. Because this again comes to the notion of a replacement society, or substitution society. If these practices of well-being are replacing a real hunger and need for development, then that needs to be pointed out. And to be fair, I do feel that there are a lot of so-called spiritual practices which, like you said, they're marshmallow. They are pop psychology, and they operate like that, and positive psychology, and that some of that can fall into it. And what I feel it does, it's like a Band-Aid solution, like a Band-Aid plaster that you put on a cut, So if you have a wound, you can actually heal the wound, or you can put a plaster Band-Aid on top of it, and it kind of superficially heals it. But it doesn't get to the source of what that, wound is in a similar way. Now, I think modern traditions have really bypassed this element of what I would call to work on oneself, because true depth spirituality was always an initiation process, which takes time, it takes work, but you see, you enter a process of transformation. You come out of it changed on a permanent level, not a temporary level. And I think we are missing this permanence of transformation or change. And we've become so used to feeling temporary transformation and temporary change. And we often think that's substitute for the real change. And I feel that can be the danger there, is that, as you rightly said, it distracts you away from the real work. And okay, we live in a very fast-paced modern society where maybe we feel we don't have the time for real focus and real inner consideration, real self-observation. So we take a quick online course, or we take a quick feel-good psychology aspect. But this is a narcotic. A narcotic wears off over time, some more than others. You may have a night of it, you may have a week of it, you may have a year of it. But real, lasting, permanent transformation is an effort. And I think modern life tries to dissuade us from making the effort, and because we live in such a throwaway commercial culture.
Do you think, looking around at what's happening now, do you think that we are in grave danger of losing our soul, or being driven to find it?
That's a good question, and I'm a lifelong kind of optimist, because understanding how the spirit works, or how aspects of metaphysical, what I call the transcendental impulse, it works through life in ways that more or less is unseen. We don't really know how the metaphysical world works, and I always say that the way I perceive life is that, again, the front stage is the physical stage, but we always have a background, a metaphysical foundation of life. And that is working through life in ways which we don't expect and don't see coming. So in that sense, we're not alone. But I do feel that we are missing the potential and opportunity to participate more consciously with that transcendental impulse. So human life won't be left alone. It is a collaboration with other forces, and there are, the planet Earth is not living in a vacuum. There are cosmic forces which are impacting the evolutionary trajectory upon this planet. But what I do feel is that wherever we're going, we can get there in a smoother way or a rockier way. We can make it harder for ourselves or easier for ourselves. And the harder way is the way where we are less perceptive, of the impacts against us, what I call the hidden forces of life. There are metaphysical impacts, there are the darker forces, there are the necessary entropic forces, as we've discussed. So I feel that we need to be more aware of the non-physical forces, the influences that try to nudge us. In fact, just as a small example, in the world of technology, the people who work in that talk about choice architecture, whereby people are nudged to make certain pre-choices according to how they move through the architecture. We're being nudged each way. Now, we don't realize we're being nudged. All I'm asking for is for let us start to be more perceptive for those impacts and influences which are trying to nudge us, so we can choose, do I want to go in that direction?
Yes.
Is that my nudge, or is that something external to me which is trying to operate me in a way which I'm not aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me what the difference is between energy and electricity.
This is something I've been thinking about recently, Sandie, and I do feel a point here is that whenever we've talked about the wisdom traditions and we've looked at the wisdom traditions, we always have light as central, whether it's in all the major Orthodox religions, whether in Gnosticism. Light is part of is synonymous with source, and of course we have the sun, which is a huge consciousness engine, so to speak, a motor of life in the solar system. And that is what we know as genuine light. And that's why I say that we're being terraformed on this planet, because the planet right now is going into a world where almost as if we're living less with sunlight, with genuine light, and more with the artificial light of electricity, especially so with our chemical skies, our strange clouds, our hazy environment. We're having less direct contact with sunlight. And interestingly, Rudolf Steiner mentioned 100 years ago, around the turn of the 20th century, he said that electricity is sublight. And sublight is not only a lower form of intelligence, but it allows lower intelligences to operate through it, whereby natural light, and such as the sun and the light of inner illumination, is an environment where higher intelligences and higher evolutionary forces can operate and exist, whereby Rudolf Steiner says that sublight is where lesser, denser intelligences exist. And so even if we've talked about we're moving into a digital, ethereal, metaverse kind of future, and we think that it's less dense, I would say that's an inversion. It's actually denser because it only exists within the world of electricity, not in the world of genuine, illuminated, natural light.
Well, that's interesting, because if you look at the Jacob Lieberman's work with light and eyesight, vision, and we've seen how many children's vision is being disturbed in China. They've got this real pandemic of kids not being able to see properly because they don't go out. They spend too much time with artificial light. They don't look at the horizon. They don't go out and, their eyes adjusting to the light that's out there. So, the metaphor is they can no longer see as well, and if you take that metaphor, and apply it, I mean, we're losing our ability not just to see physically, but to see in other sense, energetically as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, we know we can talk about light as a frequency. It is, all manifestations are degrees of frequencies. And light has a certain frequency which can be used for therapies and healing. But if as you rightly said, if our children especially grow up in a world which is curated by more and more by artificial light, not only in their home environment, but in the screens, in their digital devices, in their online games, then they are immersing themselves and receiving a lower frequency of light. So you could say it's a difference again between good nutritious food and artificial fast food. And so that's another impact and influence which I think we have to be aware of in our current times.
There's so many topics that I'd like to cover with you, but we don't have time. You mentioned Steiner earlier, and I was very intrigued by what you had to say about the eighth sphere and reincarnation. I was told by a spiritual teacher that I once did some work with that, the phrase "go to the light." He said, no, when you pass through the portal, to get to the other side, do not go to the light, stay away from the light. And it sounded to me when you mentioned this in an email to me that this is something that Steiner had talked about. Is that correct?
It is, and it's a fairly large subject and complex. I'll try to have a talk about it in a few minutes.
We don't have much time.
It is, and Steiner talked about how there were forces, he currently termed them Ahrimanic forces, and how they wish to almost populate their own realm, because theirs is a kind of soulless realm, and they want to populate it with the energies and even the soul essence is of humans. So one aspect that was touched upon is that there is a potential reincarnation trap, whereby when you leave the body and go towards the light, actually you could be steered towards not the realm we should be going to, but an artificial realm, and which is like a second earth. And therefore also Steiner said, beware of like channelings and certain spiritualist seances, because you have to be very mindful of where the information is coming from, because is it coming from a genuine post-body fifth dimensional whatever sphere where we naturally move on to, or is it coming from this eighth sphere, which is the second earth, which is gathering non-evolutionary aspects. And in fact, even like in the Gurdjieff work, Gurdjieff used to say, if you're not working on yourself, you're feeding the moon.
Yeah.
Like you're feeding a separate sphere, which is not going to be beneficial for your evolvement. And Steiner, I think, put the eighth sphere in a similar category as the sublight and anything which is artificial to the human development, which is anti-human. And so that in a kind of nutshell was the eighth sphere, but it gets more complex than that. But it's kind of a second realm where we as humanity can be in communication with, can be receiving influences from, and can be steered towards populating that realm rather than our ongoing journey. And so the more conscious and mindful and aware and awake we are in our life experience, the more tools and ability of discernment and distinction we have post-body. So I think that's very important to kind of end on, Sandie. If we can develop a discernment and a conscious awareness in this life, we can take that with us to help us to navigate onwards.
Okay. And I absolutely agree with you. And discernment is the word that I use a lot. Very, very quickly before we close, Beautiful Traitor Books. What a great name. What inspired that?
Well, a twofold one. One was my love of Leonard Cohen, and Leonard Cohen has his kind of signature, I think, publishing name called Beautiful Stranger, and also I thought, well, traitor, because in a way we have to be a traitor to ourselves in order to develop ourselves, because you have to let go of certain aspects of yourself. You have to let go of certain entanglements and desires and certain ego dominance. So to give up part of yourself, you have to be a traitor to yourself. But if you do it in the right way, you can do it beautifully.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. You put a lot of thought into it. Kingsley Dennis, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Thank you for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure, Sandie. All the best.
So if you want more information about Kingsley Dennis's books, essays, movies, and other published works, visit his website, kingsleydennis.com. That brings us to the end of this week's show. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. and I'll be back at the same time next week with another edition of What is Going On. Till then, it's goodbye from me.